Charles entered the private dining room at Windsor that evening, carrying a sealed folder. He placed it on the table beside his glass and left it there in full view of the family. This was not a state occasion or a council meeting. It was a quiet memorial meal for his own mother, attended only by senior relatives and a handful of household staff. No one brings official paperwork to such a gathering. The entire point of a private family dinner in that household is that the documents remain elsewhere. Yet the king brought the folder deliberately. When the confrontation began an hour later, he said nothing. He simply sat at the head of the table and looked at the folder. That single action revealed he had walked into the room already aware that a dispute was coming and already prepared for how he would resolve it. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, had been asked to deliver the tribute. Anne had approved the choice without hesitation. Before the guests arrived, Anne noticed Sophie holding the pages too tightly, the way people do when they have read a text repeatedly, yet still doubt their ability to speak it aloud. Anne told her quietly that she had been chosen because she knew the late Queen's heart. Sophie began reading of loyalty, kindness, and duty performed without expectation of return. Those qualities defined Elizabeth's public life, and everyone present understood it. She had spoken only a short way into the tribute when Camilla interrupted her. Camilla accused Sophie of turning a family remembrance into a performance about herself. The setting made the charge especially sharp. This was a memorial for a dead woman held inside that woman's own house. One member of the family was telling another that her grief amounted to self-promotion. The accusation carried decades of history inside that institution. For 30 years, the family had argued over whose mourning was genuine and whose was performed. The argument began outside Kensington Palace in September 1997 and never fully ended. Every person at that table had been on the receiving end of the same charge at some point. Camilla reached for the insult that would land hardest. Sophie tried to continue. Her hands shook, yet she forced out another sentence because she had been given a task and intended to complete it. Camilla interrupted again, this time asking whether Sophie had ever understood the burden of the crown. The question was precise. Sophie is not the wife of a sovereign and never will be. She married the youngest son and has spent 25 years performing the quiet, unphotographed duties at the outer edge of the family. Camilla was telling her, in front of her husband, that she lacked the seniority to express sorrow in that room. Sophie lowered the pages, covered her mouth with her hand, and began to cry in front of the entire table. For several seconds, no one moved. Sophie stood at the table with her hand over her face while 14 people watched in silence. Her husband sat 3 feet away. The two most senior figures in the country were present. The family's instinct in such moments is often to let the discomfort pass rather than acknowledge it. Then Anne's chair scraped back. She stood and spoke 5 words. This dinner ends now. She did not merely declare it, she enforced it. Staff bringing the next course were stopped at the doors. Every guest was told to leave without speeches, without farewells, without the usual softening period. She emptied the room in front of roughly 30 people, making the decision irreversible. A private conversation in a corridor can later be denied. 30 witnesses watching the Princess Royal clear a dining room over the Queen's conduct cannot be erased. Camilla demanded to know what authority Anne possessed to end the evening. Charles did not answer. His wife had been publicly overruled at his own table, in his own house, at a dinner for his own mother. She asked him a direct question in front of the family, and he remained silent, looking only at the folder. A private secretary recorded everything. The royal household maintains an event log for precisely this purpose. It is a formal written account of what is said and done at official and semi-official occasions, kept so that no one can later claim events unfolded differently. The interruption, Anne's order, and the exact words all entered the log. From the moment the chair moved, the episode ceased to be a private family disagreement and became a documented incident inside the monarchy. Everyone at the table who understood the household system recognized that fact at once. The dinner was only the second half of an argument that had begun earlier that afternoon in St. George's Chapel. Sophie had gone there for a straightforward rehearsal, to read the tribute once, decide where to stand, and settle the pauses. A senior household secretary accompanied her. Anne was present examining the seating. Camilla arrived expecting to approve the final order of the evening, a responsibility she had every reason to assume as Queen Consort. Then Sophie noticed something in the printed program. Reproduced in the late Queen's own handwriting was a short message written to Sophie after one of the family's hardest periods. It thanked her for steadiness and kindness when grief had left those around her unsteady. It went further. Elizabeth had asked that Sophie lead a future private remembrance. That handwritten request changed the nature of the evening. The tribute was no longer a speaking slot allocated by an office. It became an instruction from a deceased monarch, written by hand and naming a specific person. No one could reassign it. There was no higher authority to consult. Camilla read the message twice. Whatever else the page represented, it was evidence of something she herself had never received. Elizabeth had never written her an equivalent note despite 20 years of marriage to her son. Camilla was holding someone else's proof of private regard. She told Sophie that printing such an intimate message would make the tribute appear arranged, as if designed to elevate Sophie's standing within the family. Camilla's objection was not irrational. Private affection from a monarch, reproduced in a program and circulated at a dinner table, can begin to look like a credential. People have built careers on less. Camilla, more than anyone present, knew the cost of being seen as elevated for the wrong reasons. She had lived under that judgment for 50 years. The concern itself could be debated. The manner in which she raised it could not. Sophie answered calmly that removing the message would mean ignoring the recorded wish of a woman no longer alive to defend it. She never shifted from that position. Camilla, however, was arguing about more than a program. She was confronting the long pattern by which the family decided whose feelings counted as real. In the 1990s, the institution had judged one woman's grief and one woman's account of her marriage to be the ones that mattered, and hers to be secondary. On that afternoon, she faced a page on which the late Queen had once again chosen, named and recorded preference, this time for someone else. Anne entered as Camilla set the program down. Camilla declared that no member of the family should use personal affection to gain prominence inside the monarchy. Sophie's expression changed, yet she did not respond to Camilla. She turned to the secretary and asked whether the wording matched the approved copy. The official confirmed that it did. Anne issued a clear instruction. Not one word was to be removed. Camilla stated that the matter was not settled and moved toward the door. Anne replied that their mother had already settled it. Between the chapel argument and the arrival of the dinner guests, Anne acted. She placed a second copy of the sealed instruction inside Charles's folder without informing Camilla. This was not a spontaneous reaction to an outburst later that evening. It was the calculated step of someone who understood what "not settled" meant and who ensured the evidence would be present when the issue resurfaced. Charles had read the instruction that morning. He closed the folder without comment and ordered that it be placed beside him at dinner in case his authority was challenged. He arranged in advance for the document to be within reach at a private family meal on the specific possibility that someone would question the right to decide. Only one person at that table was likely to do so. The dinner was not spoiled by a sudden loss of temper. It was a room in which two of the most senior members of the family had independently concluded hours earlier that a confrontation was probable and had prepared for it. Anne planted the paperwork. Charles positioned it. Both sat down, knowing the document was there. The arrangement worked. Camilla behaved exactly as they had anticipated, in front of witnesses, while a written record was being kept. By the end of the evening, her position within the family had been formally reduced by a document signed by her own husband. They had not wished the evening to end that way. No one sets out to have a memorial for their mother collapse. Yet they saw the risk and allowed events to unfold, then managed the consequences. Neither Anne nor Charles warned Sophie. She entered the dining room believing she would simply read a tribute to a woman she had loved. Two people who had known her for a quarter of a century had already calculated that she might be attacked while doing so. Anne had squeezed her arm and told her she had been chosen because she knew the late Queen's heart. The words were true and kind, yet they are not the words spoken when one expects an evening to pass smoothly. Anne is not a cruel woman, nor was she using Sophie. Still, there existed a version of that afternoon in which someone took Sophie aside for 90 seconds and said the evening might become difficult, that she should hold her ground, and that support was already in place. No one did so. To warn her would have required stating aloud in advance that the Queen was expected to behave badly at a memorial for the late monarch. No one in the household was prepared to put that sentence into the air before the behavior occurred. They allowed the events to happen and addressed them afterwards. After the guests left, Anne cleared the room of everyone except the private secretary keeping the record. She wanted the account written, not performed in corridors. She removed the instruction from the king's folder and placed it on the table between herself and Camilla. She read it aloud slowly. Reading a dead woman's handwriting in a room where one has just caused another woman to cry is not an argument. It is a demonstration. The instruction contained two provisions. Sophie was to deliver the family remembrance in full, and the monarch's eldest daughter was entrusted with protecting the integrity of the occasion. That second clause ended the dispute. It was neither a title nor a courtesy. It made Anne responsible for the character of the evening. When she stood and stopped the dinner, she was performing the duty her mother had written down for her. Camilla Camilla placed her hand flat on the page. Charles then spoke for the first time since the interruption. He confirmed that he had authenticated the handwriting that morning. Once the king had stated aloud, before witnesses and a recording secretary, that he had personally verified his mother's hand, the matter was closed. Camilla withdrew her hand. Charles and Anne went into his study. Anne did not request punishment, though she would have been entitled to do so. She asked a single question: whether rank can excuse cruelty when the cruelty is carried out in the name of authority. That question contained the entire issue. Camilla's defense, such as it was, held that she had been protecting the dignity of the occasion from someone using it for personal advancement. The concern was legitimate in principle. The method, making a woman in her 60s cry at a memorial for her mother-in-law, was not. Charles read the event log twice. Those who observed him say he paused at the sentence describing Sophie lowering her pages as she lost control of her face. He removed his glasses, set them down, and remained silent for a time. Then he signed a private directive, a written instruction from the sovereign intended for a limited circle rather than publication. It contained 4 provisions. The dinner would remain cancelled and would not be quietly reconvened the following week. Camilla was removed from every remaining planning decision for the memorial program. Sophie's tribute would be delivered in full at another gathering with nothing edited and nothing added to disguise the reason the first attempt had failed. And Camilla would apologize directly, without aides present, without prepared wording, and without any text drafted by communications staff. Charles specifically forbade the palace from converting the episode into a paragraph about a regrettable misunderstanding at a difficult time for the family. Camilla received the directive, read it, folded it once, and sent her staff from the room. She had spent 50 years assembling a position inside that family, every inch of it earned against resistance. She married Charles in 2005 while half the country remained hostile. She performed engagements that no one photographed for 18 years. She was crowned in Westminster Abbey in 2023, an outcome many once considered unthinkable. On one evening, at a dinner for the woman whose approval had taken her 2 decades to secure, she lost her place in the one aspect of family life that cannot be compensated: the private remembrance of their mother. A directive of that kind removes not a diary appointment, but standing within the family's grief. The contrast is instructive. The directive required roughly 40 minutes of deliberation and a single signature. The earlier conversation in the chapel between 2 women had turned into open conflict in about 90 seconds. The institution excels at formal consequences and fails catastrophically at ordinary conversation. It can produce an enforceable written instruction within an hour that permanently alters someone's position, yet it cannot produce 4 honest sentences across a table before damage is done. By midnight, the dining room at Windsor had been emptied completely. The place settings were removed, the unfinished courses taken away, and the room restored to silence as though the evening had never begun. The household treated the incomplete program and Sophie's folded speech with unusual care. Neither item was discarded. Both were placed in secure storage together with the formal incident record, a decision that signaled how seriously the events were being regarded inside the institution. Sophie sat alone for a time in a small drawing room, the unread pages of the tribute resting across her knees. Anne remained with her. Those who later described the scene said Anne was not angry with Camilla in that moment. She was angry with herself. She had recognized the tension earlier in the day. She had prepared the second copy of the instruction and ensured it reached the king's folder. She had believed, until the precise second it happened, that Camilla would not cross that line at a memorial for the late queen. That belief had proved wrong, and a woman Anne had personally encouraged to stand and speak had paid the price for the misjudgment. Sophie spoke quietly to her husband that night. She said she feared the years she had spent offering quiet companionship to an elderly woman left lonely after her husband's death might now be reinterpreted as calculation, as if closeness itself had become a weapon in someone else's struggle for position. Edward answered her directly. He told her that refusing to remove the late queen's own words from the program had honored the relationship rather than exploited it. Before any formal instruction required it of her, Camilla acted on her own. She took the following morning's memorial schedule, crossed her own name out by hand, and returned it without a covering note. She understood the shape of what had occurred and did not wait for anyone to explain it to her. At approximately 5 o'clock the next morning, Anne requested a private meeting with Sophie. The 2 women sat in a small sitting room at Windsor. Cups of tea were brought and left untouched. No aides were present. No folders lay on the table, and for once, no one was taking notes. Anne had slept little. She asked Sophie a single, unadorned question: whether the tribute should be cancelled permanently. The offer was genuine and carried carried no institutional pressure. Anne made clear that no duty required Sophie to return to the text, and that if she chose to walk away entirely, no one inside the family would regard it as failure. Sophie had already been asked to endure more than any memorial occasion should demand of a person. Anne had every practical reason to want the tribute delivered. Her mother had written the instruction. She herself had been charged with protecting its integrity. She had emptied a dining room of a reigning queen consort over it only hours earlier. If Sophie declined, those decisions risked appearing disproportionate over a speech that never reached its end. Nevertheless, Anne offered the exit first, before any other discussion. Sophie placed the pages on the table between them and pointed to the final paragraph, the section she had never been allowed to reach the previous evening. It spoke of service as the courage to remain gentle when others mistake gentleness for weakness. Sophie said she would finish the tribute. If she abandoned it, the last memory attached to the piece would be the moment her voice broke, and that was not a fair final note for the woman about whom it had been written. The delivery would take place that same afternoon at a smaller gathering limited to family, without seating arranged by rank, without formal banquet, and without printed program. Anne would stand beside her throughout. Sophie attached one condition only. Before the gathering, she would meet Camilla in private and would listen to an apology spoken by Camilla herself. Nothing was to be written by a secretary, nothing agreed in advance through intermediaries, and nothing polished by communications staff. The woman who had been publicly humiliated the night before set the terms for the apology she would accept, and the term she required was that the words be genuine. Sophie made one further request that morning. She asked that the smaller gathering have no seating ordered by rank. Precedence is the most visible daily expression of hierarchy inside that family, and it was precisely the principle Camilla had sought to defend the previous evening. Sophie removed it entirely from the occasion at which she herself had been wronged, at a moment when she could have used the same instrument to place herself at the head of the table for the first time in her married life. She did not seek to reverse positions. She sought only to complete the speech she had been asked to give. By midday, the outline of the previous night's events had reached the press. The information did not emerge through a conventional leak. 14 people had sat at the table, and roughly 20 more had been present in the building. A cancelled royal dinner generates numerous small, observable facts. Cars leaving earlier than expected, a course never served, a revised schedule circulating among staff. Journalists who specialize in the family assembled those fragments into a coherent account. One newspaper led with 4 words that shifted the public focus onto Anne. For 50 years, she had structured her working life so that she remained outside the center of attention. She undertakes more public engagements than almost any other member of the family, precisely because she treats personal notice as a failure of professional discipline. 5 words spoken at a dinner table placed her on the front page of a national newspaper as the figure who had intervened. Outside the Henry VIII gate, a small number of people began leaving white roses. The gesture was neither organized nor large. One card carried 4 words taken from the paragraph Sophie had never reached the night before. Kindness is not weakness. A broadcaster read the card on air that evening, and the phrase traveled across the country within a day. The image of flowers against those railings carries long memory in Britain. In 1997, the same gates at Kensington Palace had been buried under 10 feet of tributes, and the message then had been an accusation against the family. 29 years later, the flowers returned, and the message had changed. The public had watched one woman treated with public severity, and another stopped that treatment in full view of witnesses, and the response was one of measured approval rather than condemnation. The private apology took place before the smaller gathering, in a room with no one else present. Camilla acknowledged that jealousy and fear had transformed a memorial into a competition for standing. She accepted that rank had never conferred ownership of the family's private grief. Sophie received the words without pretense that they restored what had been damaged. She replied that forgiveness, if it came, would begin with altered behavior rather than with a carefully constructed sentence. She then delivered the full tribute that same afternoon, in the same building, before the same family with one member absent. Anne stood beside her in silence. She offered no introduction, no explanatory remarks, and no claim of credit for the previous night's actions. Sophie resumed at the exact paragraph where her voice had failed the evening before and read the entire text, including the line concerning gentleness. No one interrupted. The silence that followed belonged to the woman they had gathered to remember, which had been the original and sole purpose of the occasion before it became a contest of position. Camilla did not attend. She withdrew from all remaining memorial planning for the rest of the season. Charles accepted the withdrawal rather than imposing it, a distinction he understood and chose deliberately. Nothing in Camilla's formal constitutional position altered. She remains queen consort and continues to appear at state occasions in the correct place, performing the public role without failure. The change is quieter and more permanent. A written record now exists inside the royal household of a memorial evening halted because of her conduct, authenticated by the king and stored in an archive that will outlast every person involved. A century from now, someone will open that log, and the version of Camilla preserved there will be the version from that dining room, because that is the only version anyone took the trouble to write down. The family has done this to a woman before. It spent the 1990s permitting one authorized narrative of Diana to take hold, and it has spent every subsequent year discovering that the written record outlasts the temporary argument. Camilla had watched that process at close range. Of all the people present that night, she knew most clearly what an official log is for and how long it endures. Anne's protection of Sophie was necessary and correct, and it was executed without hesitation. Yet Camilla had spent 50 years as the person repeatedly told she did not fully belong in the room. She knew the precise temperature of exclusion. She had been given one memorial dinner in which she might have been the person at the table who understood that experience more deeply than anyone else. Instead, she looked at a woman holding a dead friend's handwritten words, a woman who had never sought advancement and who had simply sat with an elderly lady through the lonely months after that lady's husband died, and decided the appropriate response was to tell her she lacked the seniority to grieve. She was not defending the dignity of the occasion. She was defending rank at a private memorial against a woman who had never competed with her for anything, and she did so in a room where the only two people who possessed the authority to stop her were already holding the paperwork that would ultimately do so.